it's definitely not me you want to recall, but I think some of the pictures are really good. So that's the background to get in the story, and I will tell the story in pictures. I've done maps because I think one of the things you always want to know about your relative is where were they, not just what they were doing. I think the where's as big as anything, really. So apologies a couple of times because I want to fill the screen. I'll be going backwards to go forward again, but I don't do it that often, I don't think. So let me start the story. Share screen.
Is this set to music, Crystal?
Do you know, I've offered that I will do a film.
And he doesn't set. I'm sure Chris will finish with a couple of references to YouTube.
Oh, yeah. No, I've got to stop doing that. I'm getting fed up listening to my stories. Now, hopefully, there you go. Can you see Samuel in the middle of the screen?
Yeah.
Have the youngsters seen that picture before?
No, I don't think so.
I don't think I have. No.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Angela, for saying that, because I've done these things for so many people over the years, and it's horrible when you haven't got a picture of the soldier, of your relative. I always think, kind of, you need that. And doesn't he look a character, or is that just me?
Is that moustache?
I don't. Yeah, I've never seen him so young.
Yeah, I think it's the only one of him young. I don't think there is another one of him.
Really?
Yeah, other than an old man. Yeah. Well, not that I've found anyway.
Well, there is. I'm calling him Samuel. Do you know? Was he a Sam?
Sam, it was, wasn't it?
Did they call him?
Yeah.
Sam? Or in which case, I shall honour him. I shall call him Sam tonight. Then I'll stick with that. So he will have joined up. He was part of Kitchener's Third New Army. So we're talking about 1914. He's 33 years old. So, and not many of the stories around World War One, hearing of the teenagers and the youngsters going through. Samuel wasn't. He was 33. The big campaign at the end of 1914. So he's in really right at the beginning, but in September, so only a month into the war, Kitchener did his big recruitment campaign. It was the third one, so it was the third new army that Sam enlisted in, and he's enlisted within weeks probably of this coming out, and that will partly be, and there's the emblem of the Liverpool, the Kings. He was with the 13th Battalion, but the big push for him will be, that's what the war diary. I thought I'd just show you where I've got all this information from. I've just got a page there to give you an idea. You can see how it's not great to read. It's no wonder, really. It fades over the years before we've done all this. But we have this for the entire period that he's in France and Belgium. So it's an incredible story to be able to tell. And can I just say, in introduction to your granddad and great-granddad, you'll know, I'm guessing you'll know about the Somme. We'll cover that in a minute. I'm guessing you've heard about Ypres. The two, probably if we had to say, name the two battles that in many ways signify the World War One for us in the UK, we'd probably say the Somme and Ypres as the two images of horror. Your granddad stroke great-granddad was at both. So he's had a pretty lousy war for the year he was over there. So this is my background. Jump in at any point if you want me to slow or to go over anything. I'm conscious of time.
Well, that bit you just said there was at the bottom, captured trench. See at the very bottom.
There you go.
Captured trench. In captured trench.
And that's for a day. That's the only entry for the day. Now, I suspect some of that is because they are fighting, so he hasn't got time to write anything.
Yeah.
But they do normally.
We were trying to track down when he was injured, weren't we?
Yeah, we'll come to that in a minute because I've still not got the evidence of that. I'm close, but right. So Liverpool was being bombarded with Kitchener material, and this is Seaforth Barracks, and it's where the King's Liverpool Regiment were housed. I did a bit of digging on that. It was built in 1882, and that's a picture that you're looking at, for the Royal Artillery, but it became the King's Liverpool's Regiment in 1910. It's now, there's nothing there now, it's all housing. It closed in 1958, and it doesn't look like there's anything to signify what was there. But Sam would have gone there, so he joined up there on the 26th of October. So the war's 2 months old, and we know not an awful lot happened at the start of the war. It was a slow start. Everyone thought they'd be home for Christmas. He will have gone there thinking, this is great, like all of them. What a great experience this will be. Little do they know. There's Seaforth Barracks. If any of you know the area, that's the railway line to Southport railway line is up on the top. That means nothing to me, I'm afraid. There's no other marker I can. The International Marine Hotel, does that exist? I don't know.
God, that was a long time ago, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, this is certainly pre-58 because, as I say, since then it's been housing. So,
yeah, the only thing that won't have moved is the railway line.
Right.
Yeah.
So I've broken all sorts of rules here. Do not copy. Well, they were trained. Actually, the modern army does this. They were trained at Salisbury Plain. They went very quickly, so they weren't at Seaforth for very long, and they were shifted down to Salisbury Plain. The general thing around World War One is that I can see is about a year's training before you get sent over, because don't forget these aren't professional soldiers of any description. These are working men who've got no experience of anything like this. So they normally want 9 months minimum to get them what they think is a fighting man. On H.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's quite something actually. You wouldn't think it would take that long.
Yeah, but listen, you could be 9 years with me and you wouldn't achieve it. So, so Salisbury Plain, there is a Liverpool regiment. It's the Scottish one. So, but I just thought that's all I could find around Salisbury. They then got shifted to Aldershot. I think I've got a date for that. They were transferred.
Yeah, it's just down the road from me.
Oh, is it?
That's like 5 minutes down the road from me. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, in May, so we're now into 1915. In May, they were transferred to the 25th Division, 76th Brigade. Just because of that, they were then getting them ready to send them over. And Aldershot was the big training out. And that is actually, we are looking at a King's Liverpool regiment there at Aldershot.
Oh, no way, that's crazy.
And I have no idea whether that still survives. I know the army are heavily in Aldershot, but I don't know whether those buildings are part of any site or could easily be.
No, that's on the way to B&Q, Chris, if you want to know.
Oh. Now, if I'd have known that, I'd have put a little sign on this, a little B&Q sign.
You'd never guess he's just bought his first house, would you?
So we're into, in terms of timing of this, we're into May 1915. It's September when he goes across. Just to put things into perspective of what's going on in the world, because it's relevant, the Second Battle of Ypres started on April the 22nd, 1915. So it's where Sam would be heading. So at the time he's training, in May he goes to Aldershot. It would have been 2 weeks into the Second Battle of Ypres. There were 3 battles of Ypres. The second one was 1915, and the final one was started July 31st, 1917. So actually, when Sam was over there, he was in between the second and the third battles. But it was always, Ypres was a place you didn't want to be in, even outside the main thrusts. So the next bit I have for him, there's a couple of photographs there. There's signallers at Aldershot from the Liverpool regiment. Now he wasn't a signaller, so he'll not be in that picture. It was nice to capture. I love the dog.
That's lovely. Yeah.
The dog.
Yeah.
They look like a load of football supporters.
Too well behaved, Harry. Right.
And a random chap in the window at the back.
Who's that?
There's a random chap in the window at the back.
Oh, so there is. Yeah. So there.
That's a ghost.
So people were photo bombing all the way back in 1915.
So I've got him down as September the 26th, leaving Aldershot in the early hours of the morning. They landed at Le Havre in France at 2 a.m. The big 2 ports where you landed were either Boulogne or Le Havre. Le Havre was a greater distance away from where you needed to be, but I guess it was safer. So they felt better to do that, ship them where they had some certainty of getting them there safe, and then proceed beyond from there. Some of these photographs you'll get through this evening are my own because I've been around these places so often. The reason for me going to Le Havre is because it's where Wilfred Owen when he was wounded in 1917, he came back to these shores from Le Havre. So it was on my to-do list following his. Massive area, man. It's, you know, it probably was then as well. So this is the start now. We're September the 28th, 1915. This is really the start of his war overseas. And I've got a few maps because I think they do tell the story well. There's Le Havre. You can see where he's landed. And on the first day, so he's at 2 o'clock in the morning, they arrive at Le Havre and then proceed to Hazebrouck, clearly by train. They reached that at midday on the 28th, a place called Hazebrouck, still in France. You can see, can you see my cursor moving? I think you can, can't you?
Yeah.
That is the Belgian border. So Ypres is probably that. So you can see, he wouldn't have known it, but within a day of him arriving, he's very close now to the main fighting, the main action area around Ypres. They absolutely wouldn't have a clue. They never knew anything about where they were going. Or I know nothing about Hazebrouck in itself, other than it's a place I have to visit for one of the schools I support, because one of their past pupils who was killed during World War II is buried here. This was critical in the defence of Dunkirk when the Germans were all heading round here up to Dunkirk and from the east. The British troops were all lying down here, all the tanks and the anti-aircraft, trying to delay the German advance to Dunkirk. So Hazebrouck has a lot of Second World War soldiers buried there, but not World War One. There was no fighting around here, so he was pretty safe around there. So he's there on the 28th of September. A day later, he's just being moved. A day later, he's at Meris. There's his trip. And they're just arriving at different billets. All these places have got their own camps, and they're just used to shifting all sorts of battalions through. There's no one has their own abode. They're just all using them depending on where they're being shipped to. So he arrives there 3:15 in the morning. It does seem through much of what we'll look at, they travel in the early hours of the morning. I guess it's safer. They're very, very rarely traveling in the day. And it's the facts of the war I always find really incredible, that you think of them in the trenches and you think of the fighting, but when they're absolutely shattered, they're walking for hours. You know, they're probably hungry, cold, thirsty, you name it. And in between all the things they're doing, the infantry's marching, you know. I know you read some stories of soldiers saying that they were walking asleep. They'd perfected how to almost sleep as they walked. So at this stage, so he's getting kind of close to his first fighting. So he's at Meris. A day later, so he's at Meris for 2 days, and then he left camp for this place down here called Nieppe. I know this area quite well because Armentières, you can see down here, was the base for the Royal Artillery during the First World War. Massive, all the Royal Artillery that, of course, would be sent across Belgium and France. This was their headquarters, and a lot of them stayed at Nieppe. Sorry, it's probably Nieppe, isn't it, that? But I'm going to have to excuse my pronunciation through tonight. It gets even worse when we go into Belgium. So he's there in anticipation, I guess, of his first fighting. October the 2nd to October the 5th. Interestingly, he then progresses to Plugsteert Wood. That, if any of you know anything about World War I, the soldiers, can you guess what they call that? They wouldn't manage Plugsteert. That became Plug Street. all the soldiers. In fact, most people who ever go around the Western Front just call that Plug Street. And when I saw he was here, I thought, and it's in the trenches, so this is the first time he's seen a trench, is here. And I thought, well, that's Meris. Just to give you an idea of, you see these lovely places on the map. That's what Meris looked like.
Wow. God.
And most of the places we've been at will have looked like that. That is Plug Street.
Yes.
Plug Street. And the Plug Street, he went there for instruction. That's Plug Street. I mean, you know, it's hardly a town or a village that you'd remember, I guess, when you're in it. There's just destruction everywhere. But they used, Plug Street was used during, and it was early stage of the war. It was a horror. And I've got a friend of mine who's got a relative who passed away during that time. We visited his grave in Plug Street. But I hadn't realised that the fighting there ended really early on in the war. So after the first 6 months, they didn't really fight there again. So what they used it as a training facility for the new soldiers coming over. So Sam went straight to the trenches, but purely to be trained, just to get used to kind of what it was all about. I also found something interesting about this place, looking at the dates. 3 months after he left here, after his training here, Winston Churchill was there with his troop. I guess there must be so many stories like that of people crossing paths that you'd never know it. The one thing you do know when you do the Western Front, there's no distance between any of these places. Whether you're in Belgium or France, the actual line of where the soldiers were fighting, it's really quite narrow, really noticeably so. So he did his training at Plug Street. He was there October the 2nd to October the 5th. So he's 3 days in the trench. So he will have lived in that trench, learnt how to look after himself, etc. I wouldn't have thought in October it would be great weather, so he probably got used to the rubbish in there as well. You'll see it when we go through the dates as he's fighting. They tend to put you in a trench for up to 5 days and then relieve you. They recognise the massive mental trauma of trench, of being in the front line. So generally speaking, you wouldn't be in there much more than 4 or 5 days, and then you pulled away again. Maybe not for very long, and you're back in again. It looks like his training followed that suit, looking at the dates when he was there. So he did this middle of October, back to Neat that we saw, and then I'm going to do me going backwards a bit, and then headed for billets at this. You can see the border with Belgium. He's still in France here, so he's at this place called Belle-Île, not a place I know. Got there on October the 14th, mid-afternoon. Stayed there. What have I got here? 3 days, and then at 9 o'clock on the morning of October the 15th was transferred to this place here called Oudedam. So he's now in Belgium. You can see Ypres up in the distance there. The front line at this time would be something, if you look at my cursor, would be something like that. Sorry, would be something like that. They call it the Ypres. A salient is, well, the best way I describe it is a sticky out bit. So the Ypres salient we kind of did that. So the Germans would be, the reason why it was so dangerous is the Germans could be alongside you. If it was a straight line, your trench, that's okay. They're all in front of you. But if you've got this salient, it means actually you can be fired on from what feels like behind you. So they were very dangerous. Hence, whenever these main salients, Ypres being one, they were so desperate to straighten the line. And here was where they wanted the line straightening. Here is where Sam fought. So he's very much part of that history. So he was at Oudedam, say, still into mid-October. This is his first taste of fighting. He's then moved to the trenches at Sanctuary Wood. The reason I put on the map museums or cemeteries is that they are always where the fighting took place. So rather than the town or the village, in the First World War, you were buried on the ground you were fighting. So it's very much, if you're ever looking for the site of a relative, you've got it when you find the cemetery. So he was there October the 17th to the 21st. So there you go. 4 days was his first taste. First time on the front line. We talk about these places. I'll show you Sanctuary Wood. Oh, there's where he came from, his billets I mentioned. And that wasn't destroyed. So that will have been how Sam saw it. And that would have been really exciting for him because he'll have never left England. He'll have never seen a continental square that we get so used to. We're so lucky. This will all have been amazing for them in the middle of being terrified. Such contrast of emotions. And that's the same place. That's 1915. I think it might be 1916. That's the same place in 1918 after the German Spring Offensive. They had a scorched earth policy that as they retreated, they just wrecked everything. So Yeah, I don't think many of the places that Sam will have been at, not many of them will look like that. Right, we're now at Sanctuary Wood. So that's my photograph of Sanctuary Wood. Would have undoubtedly, the trees on the left are all that's really left of it. And it is like all these places, most of the Western Front are just miles of flat land with occasional inclines. So somewhere like Passchendaele, why did so many men die at Passchendaele? Because it was on a bit of a hill, and it just gave such vantage, looking down. Sanctuary Wood was the same, just the other side of that. So it became hotly contested. And of course, when you look at it like that, and you feel a bit of history when you're there, what you forget is that was Sanctuary Wood when Sam was there. So when he's in Belgium, it's so boggy around that area and it's so blasted because you get all the peat ground and the rain, and then they shell it. Millions of shells drop. So you just create these craters. So everywhere you look where they've got pictures of how it looked at the time, just looks like you're on the moon. That there are, I don't know how they had any distinguishing features as to where they were going. And in fact, my mate Jeff, don't you, Harry? Jeff Painter. Yep. His great uncle died here, and when we read the diaries for his war, his company basically got lost, turned completely the wrong way, and turned right into the Germans, and they were massacred. And we thought it's no surprise, because you must know whether you're heading north, south, east, or west, and it must all look the same. So this was, hate to say it, but that's probably Sam's first view of fighting in the war at Sanctuary Wood. So he's there for 4 days, and he's pulled out to a place called Steenvoorde, which I think was relatively untouched. So I think that will have been the place he came back to. And to give you again, sorry, I do think it worth jumping back to maps. There's Steenvoorde. So he's back into France. So, I mean, to me, that looks some distance. I'm not going to... He left at 5 o'clock at night. They left the trench. Yeah, and it's taken them over a day. So after all of that, and I don't know what happened on that day. The diary doesn't record it, but you'd be shattered emotionally and physically, and that feels a long enough drive. Never mind a march.
Yeah.
But then again, he's way away. He's safe. There will be a critical factor in that. Will have been really important to them. So there's Steenvoorde. He's only there he's there for a month. So his first taste of war, 4 days in the trenches at Sanctuary Wood, and then he's a month in those billets that we just shown at Steenvoorde. Probably glad to get away from it, having had his first viewing of it all. On the 23rd of October, on the 23rd of November, he then moved to a place called Popperinge, which is one of my favourite places up here. Popperinge was pretty well always safe. It was the epicenter of all movement of Allied troops. I did read recently of bombs hitting it, and occasionally the Germans targeted it, but not really, not worthy of note. I've seen somebody recently draw an arrow from Poppering through Ypres to here, and if you think of the arrow looking like that, that's the bit where the fighting was, and here, where you pull the bow, was the safe bit, was the bit where your hand was. So it became a haven. This will have been a massive place in Sam's war because everyone knew it as the safe haven. And more than that, they created a place called Talbot House. Come to that in a minute, which is famous to this day. So there's Poppering, which is pretty much as it was then. As I say, it was untouched. So the buildings survived both wars, which is good. It's a delightful place. And they've got these great posters as you go into the main square showing what it was like at the time. I had a talk from the guy that owns this Talbot House, which I'll come to in a second. And he said it was the first ever one-way system devised in Belgium. And he said, you're all to blame. It was the British who introduced it.
Yeah.
Apparently they've still got it, and it's still horrendous. I can vouch for that.
So, Chris, when you were saying that like Sam was in that trench the first time for sort of 4 days and then he moved on, Is that what they typically did? Would they only ever sort of be on the line in the trench for like a few days, and they're just constantly sort of cycling them in and out?
Yeah, yeah. It was always that you're always in reserve, then you're at the front line, then in reserve. So they felt it gave the soldiers, for as horrendous it was, at least they felt they could see the light at the end of the tunnel, that it was only for that period. Now, that changes, and you'll see why. Obviously, if they're in the middle of if there's a really huge battle on the go, they can't predict what's going to happen. So some of them could be for a lot longer. But where it was, kind of call it routine, you know what I mean? It would only be for 4 days. And they got people right behind, so that nothing was lost as you're coming out, somebody else is coming in.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was the pattern. And that will have been a big deal for Sam. This is his first taste of it. You know, he's only been over there a month or two, and he's suddenly, you know, and it's pretty obvious Sanctuary Wood is a significant part of the fight. Ypres horrible. And I think around the fighting around that salient. So whatever went on from in those 4 days will have been terrifying. I know just off the, just to the east of Ypres here, this road here, you may have heard of Menin Road. If you read anything about the war, and often the soldiers will say Menin Road was the horror of Menin Road. So many soldiers lost their lives in this bit. Menin Road comes all the way from through Poppering, but this bit, and this just to the left of Hooge, there's a little spot there as a roundabout now. That was Hellfire Corner, and they reckon it was the most dangerous place in the First World War because it had so many snipers, heavy artillery. Everybody was raining on here, so the minute you pop your head round, you were likely to get it shot. So they had signs. I've seen old photographs of it, signs everywhere saying, keep down. Just, it looks as if there's nothing going on, but they were losing so many men. You go there now, it's the pokiest roundabout you've ever seen. There's nothing to mark its significance. It's a real shame. But this is the area Sam's at, so there's nothing good going on here. It will have been a really terrifying first view of the war. Bear in mind, undoubtedly it'll be the craters that we saw before. So he'll have had the rats and what was it Wilfred Owen says? It broke the sanctity of the get mud in his pajamas. It was in the middle of all the fighting, he said, somehow getting mud in your pajamas. Felt like a new life. I'll never forget that line. So, right, so there's Poppering, and I love this photograph as well. If you've got all 5 of us and it's in the way, you can move where it's positioned.
Yeah,
no, it's good.
Okay, just in a couple of times it might block something. I love this picture because it kind of integrates what that square Poppering was like with the old and the new together. I just think that's absolutely brilliant. And this is where you see the soldiers marching in here. Sam will have done this. Poppering pops up, excuse the pun, loads of times. So he unusually, in all the stories I've done of soldiers, I've never found one that's been based at Poppering. Normally they come there because it was seen as the safe haven, and they came to visit the place I'm now going to show you. But he was actually billeted there for quite some time. On this first occasion, he's there 5 days before he goes back to some trenches, which we'll cover in a second. So when he's here, and beautifully, it's the month that he goes here. He arrives here on the 23rd of November at Poppering. On the 1st of November, so it's only open 3 days, this place called Talbot House. Can you see Talbot House?
Yeah.
Well, that was taken over by Tubby Clayton was his name, and it became a fantastic building. It's a museum to this day. It became a haven for soldiers. No rank, nothing. You were basically just a human being when you crossed the door. You had to forget the war. Say no. There was no rank mattered anything. You could treat anybody the same way, and they looked after you. It's the most amazing place. That was how it looked like back in the day. And they would feed them. There was a chapel up at the top. They had a little billiard table. Always feed, not cups of tea and food. And when you go to the museum now, obviously you pay to go in. They treat you like they treated the soldiers back in the day. So when I first went there, we were maximising time. We wanted to look around, and they're very keen to pull you down towards the kitchen. Now, have a cup of tea, and we were just saying, oh, it's all right, honestly. And then they had to say, no, you have to have a cup of tea if you come in. We thought, oh God, yeah, we never thought of that. It's part of the experience. But that's it today. That's the same view. And they're in real financial trouble because of COVID. They're desperately trying to keep the place going. It would be hard. It's over 100 years old. It would be heartbreaking if they lost it. So he will have. There's no doubt about it. I checked. They're just putting online now the visitors book. Soldiers would sign in as they came in if they wanted to, and they're just putting them online now. They've done about a fifth of them, and I put his name in this afternoon, thinking, wouldn't it be great? Anyway, it didn't come up. I've not. It would have been lovely, though, wouldn't it? So it's a huge part of his life. This he will have, every time they came back to here, he will have found Talbot House just made him forget there was a war on. It was a brilliant place for all the soldiers. Just trying to give you a perspective now of his fighting. We're going to move on to his next, November the 29th to December the 6th. So he's actually, this is a long time. He's in the trenches at this place called St Eloi here. So that line there is Sanctuary Wood. That is the front line. So the Germans are on the right of that. We're on left. So you can see Sanctuary Wood. So he is absolutely right in the firing line. Hill 60. I mentioned about the high ground. Hill 60. Well, you buy lots of books about Hill 60. When you go there, it is really high. It's really unusual because it's not very wide. But gosh, when you stand on there, you see the Cloth Hall in Ypres. You can see Zilla Beak, Zonna Beak. You can see it's just an amazing vantage point. So clearly, everybody wanted Hill 60. So the fighting around here was probably going to be as horrible as you could get. I don't think they'll have ever had. When you go to some of the parts of the Western Front, the soldiers talk about they've gone 6 months and they wouldn't know there was a German in front of them. They're just very passive. Sam's never had that. He's in really dangerous trenches all the time, and when we do the Somme, it's the same there. He's not had an easy war at all.
Why is that? What's the difference? Is that, were they just sort of, because I mean, imagine they're still in the trenches, so what, are they just sort of shelling the trenches, or?
Because they would be, because they're strategically getting, they were so determined to get to the water, to the sea at Antwerp. They wanted, Ypres was in the way. Everybody had to get through here. So it became, as much as anything, and it was more of the significance of having it. If you're in somewhere to the north, somewhere like Lille, it had less strategic value. So the generals wouldn't be pushing the action all the time. Whereas here, every week there'll have been some sort of plan as to, even if they could only take 50 yards or 100 yards, and often you saw that going through, you'd take a trench and they'd move back 100 yards and the next day they've lost it again. So they're constantly used to, and also they'd have them on raids. They would never want, here they'd always want the enemy to be agitated. So they would be trying to get prisoners to find out what's happening. Actually, we'll come to a story of that in a minute with you.
So it was like quite close quarter fighting.
Oh yeah. Well, I've got a picture of that. He gets even more of that on the Somme, but Sam will undoubtedly have had hand-to-hand fighting. There's no doubt about it. He will have had. My grandfather was in the trench mortars, so yes, he's right in the middle of it all, but it will have been firing the shells from the ground. So he won't have been charging with his bayonet. Sam will have been absolutely in the worst possible situation. And also Ypres was known for, you think of anything bad in World War One, it hit this area. Sectors, we'll cover gas in a minute. But one feature about this place here, St Eloi, when he first joined, and I looked at the months, this area became, all the way around here and south of where we're looking, was massive for the Third Battle of Ypres for underground tunnelling. So there were mines put in. I think on that day in 1917, I think they had 17 mines put underneath here. That was the year after Sam was here. But they'd started mining, and this area, St Eloi, was really known for the tunnelling. So as he arrived, again, because they're so close to the German trenches, it was seen as, that's a horrible thing to say, but an easier way to kill thousands, in a relatively safe environment. It wasn't safe because the Germans were doing the same thing. And the minute they heard you tunnelling, then they would pull your tunnel. So there were so many tunnelers, ex-miners, that died, the tunnel collapsing on them. So his first taste of this, that's a picture from St. Ower. I don't know the regiment. That's the trenches, all right. And again, you tend to think of it as a place name. That is St. Ower in 1915. On it, you're looking for something to distinguish where he is. You see the tree tops at the top there, what's left of trees. Yeah. So all this area, it's just been blasted. There's nothing left. So we call it a place name now, and it will have been at a time, not when Sam was there. It's just horrible. And this is in good weather, It's just...
it looks like moving anywhere would have been exhausting.
Totally. Yeah, totally.
Just like walking through treacle, just like...
Well, I think they said at Passchendaele more soldiers drowned than were killed, because once they got into that muck, you couldn't help them, and they would slowly get sucked down. They lost more that way than through the fighting itself. I know that you think of it as a fighting war, but actually the conditions were as guilty of the men losing their lives as anything. So that's the sort of, I don't know where that was from, but there's one of the mines going off. And they must have been horrendous sites. I've been to a couple. There's one. Sorry?
The craters are still there, aren't they? I've seen pictures of them.
Yes, there are. They're not all of them, but some of them are ponds. There's a peace pond near, we'll come to it, in Belgium where Sam was. They've created it as a place to go to. There's nothing there, but it's a nice place to reflect, and think of all that had gone on. And you can visit these places. I've been down some of these things, and they're remarkable what they did. And all of it being done clandestine, really, obviously, because it was so significant and was a major part in achieving what they did around this area. So that is St. Ower. Those trenches are German trenches. So this is from the time where Sam was there. So this is kind of the worst, probably the first horror that he experienced. So we're into December now, 1915. What I should have said is he was 7 days in the trenches, then went for 6 days back to Poppering, and then on December the 13th, he's back in the trenches again. So clearly there's a lot going on here. And only because I checked on this, there was a major attack by the Germans in December. So Sam landed in the worst place at the wrong time as he got here. Say there was he was here 13th to the 21st of December, which is longer than they would normally, but there was a massive gas attack by the Germans on the 19th of December. And that just sounds, well, I'll tell that story. He had two absolute horrors, did Sam. This is the first one. That says this is on the 19th of December. This is not from the war diary. As I say, they didn't record. I found this from another source. At 5 a.m. on the 19th of December, Germans released chlorine gas to the British front line. The wind was in the right direction, which forced it over all the British troops. However, fortunately, prisoners had indicated that a gas attack was imminent, so troops were ready for it. And the British artillery prevented German attacks. So even though they let the gas off, it sounds like the British knew what was happening, and they blasted anything in the area. So it kept the Germans in their trenches. That's at 5 o'clock in the morning. At 6:15 a.m., a second phase opened up, but this time by gas shells, which was a new experience. They fired them behind the lines with a new gas, phosgene. Gas masks were unable to protect this. Apparently the gas mask didn't work against this new gas. And though British front line stood firm, casualties were serious. And this is right over, we'll see it in a minute, this is right over Sam. There were 1,000 incapacitated, with 120 dying soon afterwards. Now, gosh, I've seen lots of gas attacks. That is probably one of the worst gas attacks, early days of a new gas, but I would call that really significant. That's impacted on everyone. And at 2:15 p.m., the Germans then commenced bombing everything towards the British lines. But that only lasted 2 days. When it ended, and this is where Sam's arrived, he's then part of protecting from that. So on the 21st, where the Germans gave up, Sam's allowed to leave the trench. So they recognised they'd been there over a week, but obviously while this was going on, they had to stay there. So he stayed for all this period.
A lot of trenches, isn't it, Chris?
Oh, massive.
Yeah, a lot of trenches.
The Germans had way more, and they were much better trenches. They always built it, I mean, they were building it on ground that was normally raised, but they're always much more substantial. Ours were just awful while our conditions were so poor. Some of the Germans were concrete ones as time grew. This wouldn't be doing. What you can see on this map here, worthy because I mentioned in a second, these are all craters where I talked about mines going off, and there was a significant, Sam fortunately wasn't here when it happened, but there was major fighting going on around these craters very soon after this. We'll come to that in a minute. But that's what he would have experienced. We know he was at St. Eloi. We know the German front line is this. So Sam is somewhere here. And if you can see from this map, the extent of the gas cloud, look what it covered. Up to Ypres, Reningels, where we saw he was. Oh, it's massive. Interestingly also, it said the wind changes direction, of course, so it blew back a wee bit. So this area, the Germans were covering themselves in effect. So, they will have been just as affected. So I think of all the things Sam did, that's got to be it's got to be the most horrendous. There is some.
Did the Allies use gas at any point, Chris?
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's no good guys in this.
Yeah. Okay.
Once we'd all got the technology to do anything, and there was no moral at the time. And now, with the whole thought of that is chemical warfare is banned. But during the First World War, anything went. And it wasn't seen as a dirty tactic. It was just more.
War.
Yeah, war, and science had progressed. So he's pulled out of that after a nightmare 8 days. I mean, I can't exaggerate that enough. 8 days in the middle of all that must have been horrific. He's then back in reserve billets at Dickerbush, which I have a map of that. Should have put more maps in. Don't worry. I get plenty, so you will get it. Is it on that one?
It's a needle in a haystack.
Oh, I have got it. It should be on that one. Oh, I'll tell you, it is on that one. You see that little circle there? For some unknown reason, it didn't put the name in. That is Dickerbush. So he's fighting. Vormazila is the next trench he'll go to, but St. Eloi is a mile to the east, so it's there. So he's back here to Dickerbush. So he's no great distance. That will be 5 miles maybe, but safe. So that's where he was. And it would have been like that when he was there. I've got quite a few people I've researched. Dickerbush seems to be, if you're fighting in the Ypres area, it seems a common place for must have been a large camp. So they stayed there. Let's look at the dates. He went back to Poppering for 6 days, arrived here on the 28th of December, stayed here for 3 days, and then another 4, 7. So he's there for a week, and then they left camp to go to, so they're going back now to Reningels. So he's had his first taste of it, and they're then moving him west towards France. So he's moving further and further away. But while they're here, one company, this is in the diary, one company was at rest and 2 companies worked on these trenches, but it described it as working on them, not fighting. So I'm assuming at that time they were reasonably safe places, that both of them fell. The Spring Offensive in March 1918, all of these places we're talking about now, horrifyingly, Germany just took them all. Having had years of loss of life to secure all this, within a month, the Germans almost got to Paris. And the soldiers will talk about, those who are wounded in the UK will look at it and say, seeing the names in the paper, all the blood shed and then all just gone in a week. It was that whole Spring Offensive could easily have changed. But for the Americans during the war would have changed everything that we now can see happen. So it's hard. It's a tough history for a lot of people around this. Sam would have been the same. He'll have seen the names of these places he was at. So he's back at Dickerbush he's at Renningelst now. He got quite some rest here. I've got him down from January the 4th to February the 5th. So it's a month at this camp. On February the 6th, they're back to Poppering and jump on a train, or end train as the diary always refers to it, for this place here called now forget my blue, that's the way Google would take them in the car. But he will have had a train journey to this place here.
But yeah, and he wouldn't have had Google then, I guess, either. So
hard to believe. Yeah, hard to believe. So therefore, just to jump on the train, and then they head on the 7th of Feb. They're at this place here, Mark Q, Nort Bicourt, and they're there for 3 weeks. Something about that. Oh no, that I just checked on all that. There's one Commonwealth War grave there. It's pretty clear. These places here are totally safe. There's one at next place he's at. So there's no fighting throughout the war gone on here. So he must have realised, he's a long way away from the scary side of things. I got a couple of pictures of those. So that's Renningelst. He was there for about a month, and he does return there, and that would have been how he saw it. That's brilliant seeing where he was.
Is that pattern with Sam where they basically sort of stuck him on a boat and threw him straight on the front line, and then he seems like he had some time away from it? Is that like a typical pattern that they would just sort of take the fresh blood and just throw them right into kind of hell and then bring them over?
Yeah, they'll have had the training, so they'll think his year is 9 months. His year in the UK, we'll have him ready. We've obviously seen he did that at Plug Street. He's learnt what a trench is all about. They didn't all get that. Some of them were very green going in. As the war got worse, they hardly trained you. They just threw you at it. Because he's gone in early, they're kind of doing it the right way, and are able to, because they've got enough resource. But as they lose men, they can't afford to do that. So the whole scenario changes through the years. Because Sam's war ended on the Somme, he didn't get that. He got the first half of the war, not the second half. That was enough. So there's his camp. There's Renningelst, where their camp was. I found that was a great map. So if anyone was wanted to find out where he stayed a month, and actually this place, Renningelst, he's there regularly. And when we go through the end, I'll skip those. But there's the camp. So it would be very easy. It will only be an open field. But I have done this with my own grandfather and stood in there, and it's not just any field. It's the field my granddad was in, it just makes it really special. And these are just the places en route they've just shown. But again, just wanted to show you, not all of them got away. That was how it ended the war. It wasn't like that when Sam was there, but in the spring offensive, the Germans just, again, this scorched earth policy, when they were pulling back, they just destroyed everything. There was a story here of there were 2 months after Sam was here, there's a large ammunition dump here. It doesn't show it on the map because it was secret, but it was here in this space here. And there were soldiers had just arrived, pitched their tents right by the munition area. And without any warning, it was just an accident. Something went off, and massive explosions, which killed 6 and wounded 40. That was only 2 months after Sam was there. So even your safe areas, I wouldn't want to be anywhere near any of it.
Yeah.
And those again are just the places that he will have gone through. So there's Oderdorm. We saw he was there. Uderdorm. But so he's gone through. He's had all of February back at the safe places I've just shown you. On the March the 1st, he's heading towards fighting again. So he's moved up to St Omer, through to Poppering, to this place at Uderdorm. And on the 2nd of March, he's at a trench called Kingsway. I've been looking at, I've got trench maps. There's Uderdorm. So he's gone back from Renningelst up to Uderdorm. That's St Elwell, where he's fighting before. That's the trench he'll come to soon. Kingsway is right next to here. So I don't know. It's if I drew that circle, it's somewhere around here. So he's back there on March the 2nd, there for 5 days. I have nothing at all in the war diary, but I noticed on the 2nd of March, this whole area here is called the Bluff. And on March the 2nd, the British pushed the Germans out of the Bluff. When I looked at that history, there was quite something going on around that area just before he got there. So for a week, the Germans actually advanced all the way across here and took this ground. And Sam arrived on the day when the fight back started, and they were pushed back on the 2nd of March. But he's only there for 5 days. I would have thought by the time they're doing that, they wouldn't want to, they would go further. But so nothing in the diary to express this, nothing to say what theirs was. But clearly, again, when he's landed on the trench, it's been a significant day once again. He's definitely not had it lucky. So he's there for 5 days. He's then 4 days back at Ouderdom here. And then on March the 11th, for 3 days, he's at this trench, which Vormezele. I can't get that to come up, I'm afraid. Which is, now you guys are covering if you can see the far right there, it has the trench. Can you see the far right, or have you covered them with the pictures?
Yeah, you can just see it.
Right, I've marked. So there's Vormezele is there, Scottish Wood is here, and that's Dickerbush. So middle of March, there are 2 companies at Dickerbush, headquarters, safe. 2 further headquarters in Scottish Wood, and 2 here in the trench, which would have been on alert. I have no idea which he's in. He could have been in any of those. But March the 19th, he's back at this Vormezele. Again, it just referred to being in the front line, holding the line. Don't know what went on. Couldn't find anything significant in those days, but clearly he's holding the front line again until March the 26th for a day back at Dickerbush. Then on March the 27th, they went up to St Eloi, which we saw before, relieving the 1st Northumberland Fusiliers. Now, this is amazing. That photograph is on March the 27th, the day that Sam relieved these guys. This is the 1st Northumberland Fusiliers, and it's taken from St Eloi. So Sam arrived on that scene within a few hours of that picture being taken.
Wow.
Yeah, no way.
Couldn't believe it's in the Imperial War Museum. I couldn't believe the connector. They're all waving. They've got German helmets and they stole all the German helmets and gas masks. So, and bear in mind, those gas masks would have been important because it was a new gas. The German gas masks would have protected you, whereas their own weren't. While on March the 27th, from March the 27th to April the 16th, an awful lot gone on around those craters I showed you before at St Eloi. But Sam's only there for the first day. So it's 3 weeks of German attacks going on there. For some reason, Sam's there for a day here, where we're now looking, and then he's back again to Dickerbush. So not quite sure. It's remarkable, that, doesn't it? One day at the beginning.
Move them around, yeah.
I know. And that just seems to happen a lot. They are constantly moving you. I would have thought as a battle starts, as this was, you just stay for a period around it, but he didn't. So April the 1st, he's moving away, back to this Renningelst, back to the Balliol we saw before. But I think they knew what was coming. Kemmel, big part of history of the First World War. Kemmel, do I get a map? There's Kemmel, there's St Eloi. So that was the trench he was in. This is Kemmel here. So when he was being pulled away from here, it's because I'm guessing they were terrified. Kemmel's a hill. And I keep saying how important hills are. I think they were really worried that they were vulnerable here, where he's come from, and they could not afford to lose Kemmel. Kemmel was, you own Kemmel, you're overlooking Ypres, you're owning so much of this area. It's the beginning of the end in this area. So it's obvious what they did. He was sent here to Kemmel. I've got around that area, I've got trench names. I couldn't find them. I've got a site that gives me all the trenches, as I've shared with you, Harry, but I can't find them. I gave up in the end, and there's so much detail. They often give them slang names anyway. There's no guarantee they'd record them that way. But that is Kemmel. So that's it during there. You can see the hill. and it is actually quite a hill, that one. Sometimes they're only small inclines. That was quite a walk up there. When you got to the top, you knew it. That's my photograph from the top of the hill looking down, so looking towards that today. What strikes you about these places is just how peaceful they are now. They've all got such a story to tell.
Yeah.
You know. All right, we're getting towards his last bit now. So he's at Kemmel for 4 days. So again, keeping to the norm of 4 days in the trenches. Relieved on the 29th of April to, it's Locre on there. It was Locre, L-O-C-R-E, changed its name. Belgium has 10 names for every town and village they own. It's done just to confuse tourists. And they're not always like each other either. So he's reprieved back to here, but then he's back. This trench here is where he was at. I said, I can't find it, but I know it's in this area. So between May the 3rd and, June the 4th, he's basically 4 days here, 4 days there, 4 days here, 4 days there. So he's very much toing and froing to secure this area. So June the 4th, bearing in mind by this time, he's only got 2 months of his war left over here. What we do know at this point, we're talking all Belgium here. All of this is the Ypres area, as we call it. But I've got the date here somewhere. I think it was Verdun. If anybody knows of Verdun, I think I'm pretty sure it was February. But don't matter, I can't find it. Where we talk about the Somme as being very much in our psyche, in the British psyche. The French equivalent to that is Verdun. Verdun, they lost more soldiers at Verdun than anywhere else. And that was such a horror because the Germans deliberately targeted it for no strategic objective. It was purely to bleed the French dry. So their whole idea was mass murder, in effect. And they did it hoping to destroy the morale of the French forces. So whilst that was happening, the British, obviously working alongside the French, recognised something of significance had to happen to take the Germans away from Verdun. So whilst we've got Sam here, they're planning Somme. The Somme battle will be very much in the generals' minds. The plan will have already, at this stage, we're now saying June, mid-June, early June. At that stage, well, they know what they're heading for. So amazingly, even though he's in such a significant part of the war, he had to get pulled away from here because they had a bigger plan for the Somme coming around. So, I mean, how hard that was for Sam to be pulled away from the nightmare of Ypres to be thrown into the nightmare that was called the Somme. You know, he's had a horrible war. So he was moved. You can see from the movement there. June the 11th, he's moved to Metteren. Here he's moving away. He's in France now, so he's moving away from the scene. They were there for 6 days. I think I have some pictures. That's Locre. And that was Locre after the Germans did their spring offensive.
Oh, good grief. God.
Man, that's better than nowadays. They often don't put the signs up for you now. At least you had a sign telling you where it was. Do you know, my dad, I'll quickly tell his story. When he first got out of the tank in the Second World War in Holland, they never knew where they were. And this day they actually pitched tent or whatever they slept in on the side of the road. And it actually had a sign name for the place they were at. And the place they were at was called Grave. It's actually Grave, but it was spelled Grave. What that did to him. So we talked about him being at Metteren for a week. That was Metteren. So when they say billets, that's how he will have...
Good heavens.
There's no permanent camp there. They're just living in anything they've got because these places have just been blasted. So, okay, he's back on the train you can see him coming from Metteren. So that's Ypres, and he's coming all the way. He must have felt here, these are all the places that he stayed at. I've got a couple of pictures to come all the way down to Doulon. There's Arras. If you know your friends, Harry, you've been to Arras, haven't you?
A few times, yep.
Right. So here, ironically, he would have felt at this stage they're safe. They're just out of it. They've got away from the horror that is Ypres. Thank God they are miles away from anything that mattered being over here. But they know what was around the corner. So these are the places that he went through, Doulons. And none of these were affected by that. None of these were harmed. Right, and this is his next bit now. So there we have Doulons on the other map. All of a sudden, he's headed all the way down through these places to Amiens. Once you start going east of Amiens, you head into the Somme. So I suspect at this stage, and the dates here are, sorry, he arrived at Doulons. Oh gosh, he arrived here on the 1st of July. And for anyone who knows the history, the 1st of July was the first day of the Battle of the Somme. And that also is when Sam was there, so he's so close to it all. That is the, I'm probably telling you something you already know, it's the highest number of casualties ever suffered in a single day in British military history. They lost, I think it's 19,240 to be precise, were killed in one day, and 57,000 casualties. It's the worst single day, which is why we tend to think of the Somme as being the worst of the worst. Well, the stats tell you in one day it was. And it was cannon fodder. It was, soldiers walking in a straight line slowly towards machine gun fire. But when that horrible day, Sam's here. So he's very close to it. He may well be getting to know now there's something else on the go. So that's his journey heading towards those are the places he went through. And again, these were unaffected. That's actually a Newfoundland regiment, but that's the square. King George V visited there afterwards, which was nice of him. Okay, so he's now heading. This is the last bit now. This is where we're going to see him get wounded. So the key dates here are he's at Mouloncourt. You can see at the bottom left here, July the 7th. So it's 7 days into the Battle of the Somme. They marched there from 10 o'clock at night to 3 o'clock in the morning. Again, that pattern is throughout all of this history. Carnoy, he was in trenches there, July the 9th to the 10th. He's at trenches at Carnoy. I have a picture of that. That's Carnoy with the soldiers saying prayers before battle. I do find there's a brilliant line in the war diary that says, moved to trenches just north of Carnoy, arriving at 4 p.m, stopped en route for 2 hours for dinner. And I've never, ever seen anything like that. I mean, I'm guessing they knew he was into the horror of the Somme, so food and drink was probably really important, but it just seemed it seemed the sort of thing you'd write in your own diary, on holiday, stops en route for 2 hours for dinner. So on July the 11th, he's in the trenches. He's here. He moved this short distance this is the end now, on July the 13th. We're now at a stage where we don't know where he was wounded, but it's somewhere on this map. This place here called Bézentin-le-Grand, this is key area around the Somme. It's just around the town of Albert, which was a key point, as was Longueval. These were critical places to take. So he initially is in, and this red line, Harry and I, we saw this. This is what we saw the other day, Harry. They're the British trenches. So we know, here's the war diary for Sam, actually says they're in the front line at Bézentin-le-Grand. So we know he's here. He didn't say the wood. He hasn't said he's somewhere here. So again, great thing when I do these things, when I go over there, you would be able to trace. The Scottish libraries based at Edinburgh have every single World War I trench map overlaid on an ordnance survey map. And it's all online. It's brilliant. So you could drill into this and you can see where it is today. I've done it for my grandfather. I knew he was in Red Trench in France, in Méricourt, and we went over there and we could stand exactly in the field where Red Trench was. It was a remarkable thing to do. So all we know there, again, there's nothing in the, sadly, there's nothing in the diary. Other than there's something, it talks here about at 3:30 in the morning of the 14th, when moving out of Bézentin, they take a German trench, but you said, Harry, before. So they capture on the 14th of July. They've advanced. They've clearly gone, as the phrase is, they've gone over the top. They've captured a German trench, which I would have thought was quite remarkable because the machine gun emplacements. It must have been a almost impossible thing to do, but they did. They captured it. He's 4 days somewhere around here in a captured German trench. On the 19th of July, they do pull them back. So he's pulled back from a captured trench. Another regiment would have gone in. They were 3 days, a 2-hour march west of this. It doesn't say where, but he's 2 hours away from the horror. But then back again on the 22nd of July, by which time they're fighting. You can see Delville Wood. The soldiers called it Devil Wood for good reason. You go into a good bookshop that has great books on the history of the First World War, there will be dozens of books just about Devil Wood. This is where Sam was. So your grandfather stroke great-grandfather, I think almost certainly is wounded here.
Mm.
I think there's the date he's there on the 22nd and the 23rd of July. And you don't, Andrew, don't you have a theory about when he was wounded from when it was announced?
Yes, somebody told me, found something, that the lists were published in September, and she said that the lists of injuries were published I think it was 5 or 6 weeks after the injury. So we tracked it back and estimated when it would be. I can't off the top of my head remember what it was now, but that was the closest we could come to guessing exactly when he was injured.
And that makes sense. And you had that down as end of July. Well, end of July, I would call the 23rd of July.
It's probably close enough, isn't it? Yeah.
So, and I know it's not after that, because on the 24th of July, they leave the trench and go back to bivouacs for 3 years and actually are in billets all the way through to mid-August. So it's pretty clear. I've not even looked beyond them because he's obviously not involved in it there. So he potentially could have been wounded here at Basingstown, but that would have been, we're saying, the 13th of July. I think the odds are it's Devil Wood.
Well, the story about the German prisoner carrying the stretcher, that was surely then a German prisoner from this trench that they took. So it must have been after that, because they had the German prisoner when he was injured. Okay. So does that make any sense?
Absolutely. If they've taken a German trench, there would have been dozens and dozens and dozens of prisoners. You know, way more than that. So yeah, that does make an awful lot of sense. I don't know if
Chris knows the story.
What about the German prisoner?
Go on. Is this something that Sam did?
Yeah, when he was injured. Sorry, you go on, Harry.
You know, go on. You say something.
Yeah, when he was injured, he was put onto a stretcher to be carried wherever they carried them to, and they had 4 German prisoners, one at each corner of the stretcher to carry him, and one kept dropping him, dropping his corner of the stretcher. And when they checked, that it was a very, very young German prisoner, and he'd had all the palm of his hand blown away, and he couldn't hold the stretcher properly, but he was too afraid to say he couldn't hold it in case they shot him or something. And that was why. That's how I know there were German prisoners involved.
Right. And there will have been masses of them. So, God, what a story that is.
Yeah. I mean, that came again from my dad, but you know, he told me that story so many times that you know, it seems to be that's something that his dad had told him, because I don't think he told him much about any of the fighting or anything like that. I've never heard him talk about much about it, but that particular story about, because I think he felt sorry for the German lad. You know, he was you know, half his leg blown up on the stretcher, but he was feeling sorry for this poor, he said, a very young German boy.
Right.
And he seemed to have, you know, a lot of sympathy for him.
Oh, what a story. And the injury, was it blown away? Do we know, was it a shell?
It was a shell, and it was the thigh muscle at the top of his leg. That's all I know. Oh, so you mean the German prisoner or my grandfather?
No, I meant Sam. I did mean Sam.
Yeah, so it was. I just know it was his thigh, the top. A chunk of it had been blown away by a shell. That's as far as I.
Because it's significant, because we know he's discharged in July 1970. That's the end of his war, isn't it?
Yeah.
He comes home and he's discharged in July 1917. I mean, they sent them back in terrible, after terrible injuries. So his must have been really
Yeah, I know he, he limped. He did work again, but he had a very bad limp apparently.
I asked Harry that. That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
It doesn't surprise me. Well, I'll show you what Devil would look like.
Mm.
That's Devil Wood.
Wow. Gosh.
That photograph was taken at, obviously just after it had been taken. But again, you tend to think of Devil, woods and greenery. And so whenever I go over there, they are green now and trees have grown again. But Sam wouldn't have seen anything like that because it's just blast.
No, gosh.
There's literally millions of shells drop on these places. And there's the sort of fighting he was involved in. I think that painting, that picture sums it up.
It looks like, I mean, if you ask someone to sort of draw what hell on earth might look like,
Andy, absolutely.
They'd draw something a bit like that, wouldn't they?
Absolutely. Yeah. Because in the middle, and you sort of think, how can even a soldier, but for someone like Sam, how can you run at, another human being like that? But when you hear them talking, they're saying it's kill or be killed. So they do become.
They're not, do it to you.
Yeah, exactly. So that they're not human really, when this is going on. But you see what I said earlier about he's had a really messy war, and he really has. He's had, whether it's the gas attack or his fighting will have been hand to hand. He has done all the things that you'll have read of going over the top. He's tasted it all, but he survived it. He's absolutely definitely one of the lucky ones, and I think he'll have been the first to say that. So that's the end of the story. What we do have is his medals. You can see from there the victory, the British, and the 14-15 Star. Don't know where all the medals are, but Angela, you sent some pictures. That's his victory medal.
Yeah, one of my cousins has got them. She's got the two that are left. Apparently, the third one they sold because it was silver, and he sold it when he needed the money when he got home and he didn't have a job or was in trouble for money with 11 children. And there was the third one that was solid silver that was sold.
Do you know what's really sad about that? That silver medal was given to the wounded. So there's not many of that. How sad is that?
Yeah.
That's the 14-15 Star.
Yeah.
Just record. There he is. That's Leavesley, Liverpool Regiment.
Yeah.
There it is. Yeah.
Yeah, my cousin, one of our other cousins has got the medals because her father was also Sam, my dad's brother, and he was older than my dad and also in the army. So he gave them to the oldest army son, and that's how his daughters now got them. That's how they came to be in Lynn's possession.
I'm just glad they're kept. I'm glad
Yeah.
Brilliant.
That's it.
Chris, what can I say? You're a genius.
That's absolutely amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely really amazing. To have found all that.
Well, it's due to the War Diary. The lovely thing with doing that is, I think, for the younger the generation, the better. So I'm glad the youngsters have joined us, because I do genuinely think.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Well, you're welcome. But I do think it's really important that not just that we say, yeah, I've got a relative that fought in the war. Everybody can say that or has a relative. But I think you'll now know, you won't remember all of this, but definitely the fighting at the Somme at Devil Wood and the fighting at the gassing. So you'll think the whole Ypres story, your heritage, it's part of our heritage. I think what they had to go through, we at least owe them to have found out really what they did go through.
Yeah.
Or just be an ethereal kind of, they were there. I can't, to help you, if you're interested, I know Angela's going to say, yeah, I converted the diary into a document like this. So,
yes, please.
So it's only 4 pages.
Wow.
It gets all of that war, the 2 years of the War Diary. What I've done is the black are his personal movements. The red is when he's actually in action, when he's fighting. So if you see a red, he's in the trenches. And the blue is just me doing a perspective of what's going on in that area, or a little bit of historical. There you go, Battle of Verdun, February, I thought it was. So that is, rather than you wading your way through hundreds of pages of War Diary, you've kind of got his war in that. So
that's amazing.
That's absolutely amazing, Chris. Yeah.
Chris, when listen to these stories, and it's obviously so much more powerful as well when it's like the story of an individual, as opposed to just a broader kind of perspective on what's happening in the war. is it kind of makes me angry a little bit, because when you sort of see people, it's probably, I mean, you know so much more about it than obviously I do, but just getting a perspective on what these people, these men in particular, kind of had to live through. I mean, like it is hell on earth. I cannot imagine what it was like.
Absolutely.
And then having to come home and sort of live with that when you kind of got back.
Yeah.
And
How
then
did they go
compare that
back
to
to
kind of
normal
people
life?
whinging about COVID and being stuck at home, and you know,
Yeah.
protesting in London, waving banners in the air, protesting about what rights they don't have. It just makes me furious. It's like they've no idea how hard it was for some people, and really how tough life was for some people.
And the big thing there, Andy, is it was tough for them, and they did it so that we could have the lives we've got. We wouldn't have the freedom now had we not resisted, you know, what was happening in both of those world wars. So actually, we're lucky the lives we've been able to live, and it doesn't feel great at the moment. But you're right, put it into perspective.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, they are all special people, but I think the thing that always strikes me is when you've met one. In my case, and my granddad is the one I think of most of all. I think of my dad in the Second World War. First World War, I think, has a very different tone to it. There was something very personal about the First World War. It was face to face. That must have been awful, and the day-to-day conditions, just living was so awful, you know, so terrible. But I think when you just realise when you look at these men and you think they are just people like you and me. There was nothing different about them. They were just thrown in. They became different because of their experiences, but they were just somebody who worked on a farm or in an office or in a. So, you know, and I can't imagine. I used to say to my dad, he was 17 when he was over fighting in Germany, and I said, I was so immature when I was 17. I can't imagine having any responsibility of that nature. And he said, you get absolutely square bashed into it. You know, he said they just knock it into you. But I think it was a different generation, a different era. I don't believe that.
I read a book. You probably read it because you know, called "Ordinary Men in the Summer."
Not heard that.
It's called "Ordinary Men." It's by a guy called Chris, I think, Browning.
Okay.
It's the story of reserve. I'm going to say I'm getting it wrong, but Reserve Police Battalion. I think it's 101. It's a German reserve battalion. And so they were kind of like going in after the army had gone through, kind of across Poland, basically, you know, kind of sweeping up behind the army. And they were, to your point, they were, just reminded me, because they were just ordinary men, right? They were reserve policemen. They were just, you know, average Joes, truck drivers and the like.
Yeah.
Who ended up basically committing like horrendous atrocities. You know, just marching, you know, Jewish families out into the woods and shooting them in the back of the head, and all this just horrendous, I mean, just unspeakable atrocities that these ordinary men just did. And it's a story about the psychology of all that and how it wasn't, these weren't like indoctrinated Nazi youth or anything, Hitler youth or anything. They're just average Joes who got swept up, and then, like, I mean, from when you were saying before about how, you know, they didn't really know what they were doing from one day to the next, right? They just sort of go somewhere and then find out what they were doing. And this happened to those guys. They just went somewhere, and then the general, whoever it was, would stand at the front and say, okay, right, today's task is taking men, women, and children into the woods, 1,000 of them, whatever it was on that particular day, that we're going to show you how to shoot them in the back of the head. Anyone want to drop out? And no one wanted to put their hand up and say, I don't want to do it. And they would just go off and do it. And it is fascinating because, like, the psychology of it was crazy.
And it's frightening because it kind of says it's in anyone.
Exactly. Yeah.
And what the human can become. You're right with those sort of stories. I've shared with Harry, with your dad, that I've got, my cousins told me a few months ago now that their grandfather committed suicide in the 60s. Didn't know this story, was amazed I didn't, because I know I'm really close to these cousins. And when they told me he'd fought in the First World War, I thought, there's going to be connections here. Let's find out why. So his service record exists, 38 pages of service record. Fantastic, such information. And I got the war diary. So I've been able to do his story. But what I found was he was in the machine gun corps. They were the worst of the worst. They were in front of the front line and were the first target for the Germans, obviously. He was gassed. He was wounded 3 times. He was gassed. He committed suicide by gassing himself. There were so many connects we found. He was, the nickname for the machine gun corps was the Suicide Crew. Such was their life expectancy, and how ironic in the 60s he'd take his own life. But his daughter my aunt is 95. I'm afraid she's very poorly, but 95 and has lived a lovely life. She's never forgiven him until a month ago when I told her the story, and she said she's at peace with him now. She kind of can now see it's a different story going on than just, this was my dad, how could he do this to us? Suddenly it's a man who can't live with it anymore. Things he must
it's so sad.
And there will be, every time we do a story like yours, Sam's, there are millions of stories that will never be told from somebody else's granddad or dad, or so why I think it's great to do this. It just fills an important hole for me. So that's why I insist you need to tell your family, you need to tell everyone.
Go on Facebook on it.
Well, I can stop recording now.